Welcome to the MS-Perspektive podcast. Perspective with a K, as I'm German. I'm Nele Handwerker, MS patient, patient advocate and author. I'm bringing you interviews, inspiration and information about living with multiple sclerosis and show you ways how you can positively influence the disease and make the best out of your diagnosis. On ms-perspektive.com, you will find the show notes, 11 free tips as a PDF, and lots of other information. And now the show begins.
This podcast is supported by Mid-Mission, a project of the nonprofit Hertie Foundation.
Thanks for tuning in again and welcome to episode number 49, CogeX Study Insights for Progressive MS on Cognitive Rehabilitation with Professor Dr. Anthony Feinstein. Professor Dr. Anthony Feinstein is a neuropsychiatrist and associate scientist and professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto in Canada, and we are talking about the CogeX study, which tried to improve the cognitive functioning, especially the processing speed of people with progressive MS, and it's very, very interesting, so enjoy. Hello, Anthony. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and a warm welcome to Toronto in Canada.
Thank you very much. We need the warm welcome because it's cold here. Very pleased to be here.
Yeah, I just had, the week before I just was talking to Audra Shefford, and she told me, yes, it's quite cold in Canada. And as I was living in Chicago for 1.5 years, I had these cold winters with minus 35 degrees Celsius. We always said, stay warm. But not so here in Germany. We are unfortunately nowadays more or less not having winters anymore. Anyhow, before we get into the interview, it would be lovely if you could introduce yourself to the audience so they know who is with me on the show today.
Well, thank you. So I'm Anthony Feinstein. I'm a professor of neuropsychiatry at the University of Toronto. I run a clinical service and a research team devoted to people with multiple sclerosis. We look at cognition and disorders of mood and affect, and also use brain imaging to understand how these conditions come about.
Great, fantastic. And what was your motivation to get into this kind of career?
So I am old enough to have been around when the very first MRI machine came into clinical medicine. I was studying in the United Kingdom at the time, just about to embark on my PhD. I was at the Institute of Neurology, which got a MRI scanner, and it turned out to be one of these transformative moments in medicine, particularly in the field of multiple sclerosis, where up until then you basically had a CT scan, which really didn't show the brain with great clarity. Now you've got a new imaging modality, MRI, which has transformed the field. You can see these plaques in much greater definition, much greater sensitivity, and that kickstarted a whole new area of research which pertained to behavioral change linked to multiple sclerosis. Up until then, it was a very quiet field. There wasn't a whole lot published, but MRI energized it. And I arrived at this kind of, lucky for me, pivotal moment in medical history where MRI was available to be used both clinically and as a research tool.
Great, fantastic. And let's start to dive a little bit into understanding cognitive impairment in progressive MS. Can you explain what cognitive impairment means in progressive MS?
Well, cognitive impairment refers to, obviously, difficulties in cognition, intellect that can occur as part of MS. And the rates of impairment are high. We know that even before individuals develop the full-blown MS clinical picture, for example, clinically isolated syndrome, the rates of impairment are as high as 30%. And as you get to relapsing remitting MS, the impairment rates go up to about 40%. When you get to primary and secondary MS, the more advanced degenerative forms of the disease, you can have impairment rates as high as 70 to 80%, some groups saying even as high as 90%. So many people with progressive MS will show cognitive difficulties.
Yeah. What are the common symptoms and challenges associated with cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis patient?
There are going to be many. I think, when your cognition goes, it affects just about every aspect of your life. So you find it much harder to sustain employment. You can struggle with activities of daily living. even simple tasks can become overwhelming. If your cognition is impaired, it can have a negative effect on relationships. And so you see lives unraveling because of cognitive deficits. It will compromise your response to rehabilitation. So it's a key clinical factor in the lives of people with MS.
Yes. And I absolutely have to say this is, let's say, there are still some fears left with me 20 years after diagnosis, and getting worst cognitive impairments. Yes, it's definitely, I think, one of the highest ones, which is still there, and I can't fight it all moments. So of course it's, because of that, it's very important to think about cognitive rehabilitation. How do you define cognitive rehabilitation, and how does it work to improve the function in MS patients?
So the approach to dealing with cognitive impairment has generally been twofold. The more long-standing one was to look at cognitive compensatory strategies. In other words, recognizing we can't improve cognition, but how can we work around the deficits to make life easier for people? So an example is if you're struggling with memory, we'll teach you how to use memory aids to remind you to do things. You have your smartphone, you set alarms, it rings, it tells you to do something, you're less likely to forget it. And that can be quite effective in terms of day-to-day functioning, but it's not going to improve your cognition.
Mm-hmm.
When you get into cognitive rehabilitation, the hope is that you can arrest the decline, prevent further decline, and perhaps even reverse some of the cognitive deficits that have arisen. And this is a much newer area of cognitive rehabilitation, cognitive work. I would say the field has only taken off over the past 5 or 6 years, really, with a number of different programs geared towards trying to improve cognition in people with MS. Much of the literature has been devoted to people with relapsing remitting MS. It's a very important point that when you review the literature, you will see the overwhelming majority of studies focus on the less severe forms of MS. And so people with progressive MS have largely been overlooked when it comes to good symptom management in general, and certainly with respect to cognition. And so our study that I think we're going to discuss a little later focuses on this particular group of people, those with progressive MS who are cognitively impaired.
Yeah, the low-hanging fruits are sometimes more attractive. But of course, the progressive patients needs it way more. So can you elaborate on the specific cognitive rehabilitation techniques used in the CogeX study?
So you've got a choice of cognitive rehabilitation interventions out there. They're increasingly becoming computerized, which is not a surprise given the whole world is moving in that direction. And we used a particular program called REACOM, which, by the way, comes from Germany.
Oh.
And it's probably the most widely used cognitive rehabilitation package in people with MS. There are a number of studies that have used REACOM, and there are many advantages to it. Number one, it's available in multiple languages. And the study that I was part of was a study involving Canada, United Kingdom, United States, Italy, Belgium, and Denmark. So we had to have different languages. You can also choose from a menu with REACOM. For example, there are going to be modules for memory, for attention and processing speed, for executive functioning. So you can tailor your intervention according to where the deficits are. So you have that option as well. So that's very helpful. And then finally, there is a literature out there suggesting that REACOM is effective. It's a small literature. It's growing. So we went with a program that had a little bit of data suggesting that this might work, and it gave us the flexibility to apply it in multiple languages and to choose the cognitive domain that we wanted to focus.
I see. Makes sense, yes. What are the potential benefits of cognitive rehabilitation for individuals with progressive MS? I mean, you were mentioning it already a little bit, that it's kind of going into all dimensions of your life, but maybe you can explain it a bit more in detail.
So there are many potential benefits from improving your cognition. I suppose one of the big ultimate benefits would be, are you able to integrate back into a workforce? That would be a very ambitious outcome. But on a lesser scale, but still very important, this might improve your ability to manage activities of daily living. It might improve your functioning around the house in terms of shopping, managing a budget. And that, of course, can have positive benefits in terms of relationships and improving your psychosocial circumstances. And so you can see that there are potentially, theoretically, some significant benefits for improving your cognition. I should add that in the MS field, we have not yet unequivocally demonstrated the positive effects of cognitive rehabilitation. That's one of the big challenges that lies down the road for us. We are still trying to bring about the cognitive improvement without necessarily taking it to the next necessary step, which is what are the real world benefits of it. That's still coming.
Okay, yeah. I mean, of course, it was probably for quite some decades so far away that nobody was digging into that field. And you had as well aerobic exercise. So how does aerobic exercise contribute to cognitive improvement in MS patients as observed in the CogeX study?
Okay, so let me just step back one step. So we realized that we were dealing with individuals who have advanced multiple sclerosis. Before we started CogeX, we didn't know that cognition could improve in this group. We assumed that it would be a very big challenge to bring about some improvement. And so we wanted to try and give our participants every opportunity to benefit from the interventions. And our hypothesis was that if we bring in more than one intervention, we might get a synergistic effect. So on the one hand, we've got cognitive rehabilitation provided by RehaCom. There's a little bit of data, some tentative data when we started our study, because we're going back 5 years now. There was some tentative data that RehaCom might be helpful. Then the second intervention was aerobic exercise. And here the data is a little more equivocal. There's some studies that show that this might help cognition. There are other negative studies. But still, there was enough evidence out there to suggest that just perhaps this intervention could also be helpful. And so we thought that should we combine cognitive rehab together with exercise, we're giving our participants the very best chance of improvement. And the theory behind exercise that it might have some anti-inflammatory properties as well, thereby, enhancing general brain function. So that, in theory, was our hypothesis, that if you combine two interventions, you're more likely to get a benefit than giving any intervention by itself.
Yeah.
And so we had a 4-arm study in which we had cognitive rehabilitation plus exercise versus cognitive rehabilitation alone with a sham exercise, and then exercise with the sham cognitive rehabilitation, and then a double sham. So you can see that there were different arms to the.
Yes, I found that study protocol extremely interesting, and we were presenting about this one in our multiple sclerosis management master's program. We catched it in the statistics module, and I found it extremely interesting how this study protocol was done, because let's say in the field alone of how you do studies, there has to be a lot of improvement coming in the next years. And I think this is a very modern approach and very interesting, because you are looking into so many possibilities of how a study could work.
Exactly. And we realized as a group we had a unique opportunity. We were given a large budget because it was such a demanding study. We realized we had a unique opportunity. We had to be innovative. We needed to try something different. We had to be bold because the stakes are high. We knew we were dealing with a group in which, impairment was significant and we didn't know whether they could get better. So, all of that informed our protocol.
Yeah. And were there any exercise-related challenges or consideration for participants in the study?
There were two. Number one is, we're dealing with people who historically might be deconditioned. And so you don't want to put them into a protocol that's going to come with complications. We needed to make sure that from a cardiovascular perspective, from a respiratory perspective, they were well enough to engage in what in principle could be quite a challenging intervention for them. So we had to get medical clearance that they were physically strong enough for this. At the same time, we do know that there are people with MS who exercise. So we didn't want to bring someone into the study who's exercising a lot and is not going to potentially benefit from the exercise that we're giving them. So those were the groups that we had to be very careful of when it came to screening.
Yeah. Screening is always very important. And can you explain how exercise impacts cognitive function at a physiological level? I had an interview on that, but unfortunately in German, so the international audience doesn't know about it.
Well, I think it's going to be through an anti-inflammatory mechanism. So, exercise can help with that, and then has a knock-on effect of improving function in general, one of which is cognition.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about the details of the CogeX study. Sorry. Could you provide an overview of the study and the objectives? I mean, you more or less did already. Are there maybe any more points to mention besides you did already?
So it's a very rich study in terms of data. We wanted to demonstrate that people with progressive MS could indeed show cognitive improvement. We then had to focus on, well, what aspect of cognition are we going to look at? We didn't want to look at everything, because that would be overwhelming for someone with MS. So we focused on processing speed, because we know that it's probably the most frequently affected cognitive domain in people with MS. We also know that it can be very well measured with a test called the Symbol Digit Modalities Test. That test also has some real-world data, so we know that if you improve by a certain number of points, it might have some benefits for you, which is important. It's probably the only cognitive test out there in the MS literature that has this threshold effect that might be clinically significant. We also wanted to have an international component to the study. We didn't want to have a small local Canadian study so this works in Toronto, but does it also work in Italy? Is it also going to work in another country? So we wanted to have an international component to it, which was essential. And the beauty of that is you collaborate with some wonderful colleagues, but you also boost your sample size, because if everybody's collecting data in different countries, you can get a very large sample size. That's one of the big pluses of the CogeX studies, that we've got a robust sample size. It's probably the biggest cognitive rehabilitation study for people with multiple sclerosis. That gives us a lot of statistical power, so we don't have to have a concern that, our result didn't show what we wanted to do because we never had enough people in the study. We have enough individuals in the study to give us that confidence that there's statistical power here. So for many reasons, we wanted to be international. We wanted a large sample size. We wanted to work in many different languages, so that if you did find something, we could say, this is almost like a universal finding.
Mm-hmm.
So multiple countries, we have no concern that it's not going to work in Europe and only in the United States or Canada, for example. So that's what the thinking behind CogeX.
Yeah. And what were the main findings in the CogeX study regarding cognitive rehabilitation and aerobic exercise?
Okay, so it was, from our perspective, a mixed blessing. Our hypothesis was, if you get the dual intervention, cognitive rehabilitation plus exercise, your processing speed would improve more than if you just got a single intervention, just the cognitive rehab or just the exercise, which in turn would lead to greater improvement than you just got the sham intervention. So that was our hypothesis. And we didn't support that. Our data did not support that. And to our surprise, we showed that there was cognitive improvement, but across all treatment arms. And in fact, that the group that got the combined intervention did not do better than, for example, the group that got the double sham. And so that was a disappointing finding. The pleasant surprise was that when you use the threshold scores for improvement, we found that almost 2/3 of our participants across all the treatment arms showed a clinically significant group improvement at 12 weeks. And we did 6-month follow-ups after that. I should have said that the interventions were for 12 weeks. So they got 12 weeks of exercise, 12 weeks of cognitive rehab. And then we went back 6 months later to collect the same data again to see if the benefits were still there. So at the end of 12 weeks, almost 2/3 of our sample showed some improvements in processing speed across the board. And then when we got to 6 months later, 45% of people were still showing those cognitive benefits. So that was a pleasant surprise. And when you broke it down to individual data, not group data, individual data, we know that a 7-point improvement in the SDMT, Symbol Digit Modality Test, was considered clinically significant, and he saw some significant findings there as well. So the pleasant surprise was people with progressive MS showed an improvement in their cognition. The challenge from an interpretive point of view was, why did your sham group do as well as your double intervention group? And we concluded that our sham wasn't a sham. We thought that our sham exercise would be neutral from an aerobic perspective, and it was. We have metrics to show that the aerobic markers didn't increase with our sham intervention. However, the individuals who got sham exercise, which was stretching and balancing exercises, showed improved walking ability. They were walking better at the end of 12 weeks. And we know now there's a small literature out there showing that if you walk better, your processing speed can improve. And so by helping people physically, there was a knock-on benefit with respect to the cognition. And we didn't know that before the study. We couldn't anticipate it. And so in retrospect, our sham group wasn't a clean sham. And we think that's why we didn't find the between group differences.
Yeah. And when I looked into the study protocol, I really liked the sham version because I thought, hey, nobody is, let's say, just throwing my time out of the window. I don't know the good English metaphor. Sorry for that. But I thought, hey, that's nice. I mean, you are giving these people something which helps them in their daily life. And so it's for me in a way not that surprising. And I don't remember who it was, if it was Eldon Calron or Rick Dalgas, but some of my interview guests told me that if you do one thing all alone, then to improve fatigue, then balancing exercises help a lot with fatigue. And fatigue, of course, is related to cognitive things. So in a way, not totally surprising and very lovely.
I think you're right. I mean, symptoms are interlinked, right? They don't exist in isolation. You improve one aspect of functioning and it can have knock-on benefits elsewhere. And we found this out. We learned this. We didn't anticipate that our sham exercise would lead to an improvement in walking ability, but it did. They were walking better. The 6-minute walk test, people did better with the sham intervention. And we think that's the reason why the processing speed also improved. I should add that there's another variable which I think is actually key to the study, and it wasn't part of our a priori hypothesis, but I think it's very relevant, which is this. We enrolled individuals who, for the most part, were leading a very quiet life. They had progressive MS. I won't say they were forgotten by the medical profession, but they were considered less of a priority. And so majority were not doing rehabilitation. They stay at home much of the time. They're not socializing that much. They're not engaging a whole lot in leisure pursuits. And suddenly along come these energetic researchers and they offer them 12 weeks, not just of cognitive rehab and of exercise or the shams, but they also offer them activity. You're going to be picked up by a taxi that's going to bring you into this center of rehabilitation. You're going to interact with research people. There's going to be social interaction. There's going to be a coffee break. You're going to be doing things that are very different from your life at home by yourself. And you're going to be doing this twice a week. And suddenly these people started to wake up, as it were. This was interesting. They liked it. They had to plan, when is a taxi going to come pick me up? It gave them meaning. It gave them purpose. They loved the interventions. They really did. They wrote notes to our research assistants thanking us for the study. They felt that for many of them, for the first time, the medical profession was paying them a lot of attention. And in response to that, for this 12-week period, they had a very different lifestyle. And that, I think, is a very key variable because that can help your cognition as well. Those are the kind of interventions can boost what we call cognitive reserve, your intellectual capacity. We know that if you've got high cognitive reserve, it can protect against cognitive decline. We know that. The literature is strong. There's even a study out there showing that in progressive MS, that if you've got good cognitive reserve, it almost overrides the effects of brain atrophy or the brain metrics, preserving relatively your cognition. What we don't know is that by boosting cognitive reserve, can we in fact improve cognition? It's one thing to kind of slow it down and protect it, but can you in fact improve it? Well, we think we've got some tentative data here, and this wasn't our primary aim, it's not a hypothesis, but we just think, we hypothesize that by boosting people's intellectual activity, by boosting their socializing, by making them more physically active, we actually enhanced their cognitive reserve. And this might, in this 12-week period, have led to some cognitive improvement as well. And if that's the case, and I think we can explore this in a further study, that's a very key finding because it's saying, and it makes perfect sense, sitting at home by yourself doing very little is bad for your brain function. We know that from the aging literature. We know that from normal aging. You want to keep your brain active. You want to be doing things as you get older. And it's exactly the same for people with an acquired brain problem. You want to use your brain. Even if your brain is struggling to do the kind of things that you wanted to do, you have to stimulate it in many ways, not just with intellect, not just with exercise, but also with social activities, with leisure pursuits. And this was one of the unintended but good consequences of CogeX, which was that we provided an enriched environment for 12 weeks for people who really appreciated it. And we think this may well have had some cognitive benefits as well. And that was across the board. It didn't matter whether it was your sham intervention or your full exercise. You were still engaged in this 12-week endeavor that for many people was a lot of fun and really interesting.
It's great. It's really lovely. And you already, gave quite some summary of that. But based on the findings, what recommendation or advice can you offer to progressive MS patients regarding cognitive rehabilitation and exercise? I mean, I always say on my blog and podcast, normally when it comes to style and design, I'm a fan of less is more. But when it comes to MS, I'm absolutely a fan of a lot helps a lot.
I think that's right. I really do. I think the advice is this: use your brain. And you can do that in multiple ways, and more ways the better. So try and get a bit of exercise. That's going to be good for you. Even physically, it's going to be good for you. Use your brain intellectually. Read podcasts, audiobooks. Get onto your computer. Learn how to use the iPad. Use your brain. And then be socially active, which can be a challenge when you've got, a disabling disease. But if you want to see your friends, you want to be able to go out, you don't want to be housebound, you want to engage in the world around you. And so the message I give my patients clinically all the time is that you've got to try and do these three things: intellectual, physical, and social activity, because we think, or in fact we know, that it's going to be good for your brain function. Is it going to reverse your cognitive decline? You have to be careful in putting out false hope. There's tentative data that it might, but it will certainly do no harm. And the potential for benefits are going to be there.
Yes, and it makes life richer for sure. So there's for sure benefits already. I mean, I'm now 43 and doing this master's program. That's for sure very exciting and interesting. And I love to read a lot of things. And I love to, when I'm on the train traveling by myself, unfortunately, we just had the train was not going, so I had to go by car to a longer place. But when I'm on the train, I love to meet new people because it's always interesting. And you get to meet people you would have never seen before. So it's always enriching your let's say imagination of what life could be. Exactly. And all that. And
we know that cognitive reserve is boosted by leisure pursuits. There's robust data to show that. If you are active in terms of leisure, hobbies, interests, etc., it's going to help your cognition. If you had a life growing up that was enriched, if you played music when you were young, if you had literature, if you did lots of things other than just your schoolwork, if it was an enriched environment, that boosted your cognitive reserve. There's robust data to show that. And I think it's really important that in the MS field, we also learn from the normal aging literature. There's been a lot of research looking into what helps people get older in terms of their cognition. That's obviously a huge healthcare issue. What helps individuals retain their cognition? And the data there is overwhelming. You want an active lifestyle, physical activity, social activity, intellectual activity. So we borrow from that. The MS literature is far behind the aging literature, but we can learn from that. And what our CogeX study does was, I think, replicate in part what the aging literature.
Yeah. So, what have you learned from the study? And I mean, that you already mentioned, but how can or should research on cognitive rehabilitation in progressive MS for patients continue?
So we've learned a lot from this. We've learned from our relative successes. We've learned from some of the things that we could have done better. But I think the big challenge now is to try and work out, why do some people improve and others don't? And it's very clear that the one-size-fits-all model of rehabilitation is outdated. We can't say, here's the program, it's going to work for everyone, because it's not. So we have to be more nimble. We have to be more flexible in our approach. We have to tailor the intervention according to the individual. And how do we do that? So we have to learn, what is it about this individual and their brain that allowed them to benefit from this, whereas the other person didn't. And that's going to be hopefully the next avenue of inquiry for us, to try and become more fine-tuned in our response, and to develop a more flexible pattern of interventions, one in which, during an intervention study, we can actually change direction. We can say, hold on, this person is not responding the way we hope. What can we do differently as part of the study to try and boost that response? And there are study designs that allow you to do that. And so looking to the future, we think this is the way to go, to have a tailored intervention according to a person's particular brain function and response. And, we haven't spoken about it, but there's an imaging component to CogeX that gives us a mechanistic understanding of why some people might have gotten better and some people did not. So I think we can use brain imaging as a very useful guide to helping us understand the mechanism of improvement. And so the next study will be, once again, to bring in colleagues from other disciplines, from different countries, and have a more subtle, more fine-tuned study geared towards individuals as opposed to people as a large group.
Yeah. And it's these let's say these modern study designs, I think they are not easy in the planning, but they are very, very interesting when you, let's say, shut down or just switch a person, or maybe shut down a certain arm and switch persons to whatever it makes sense. And of course, our whole medicine is going into the individualization of treatment. And it totally makes sense, because we are all very different. This disease is very different in each person. So very interesting and exciting things are on the horizon.
All we need now is lots of money.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't help with that. But I hope all you smart guys and girls will find ways to get it. But as the population is getting older, and of course the MS population as well is getting older, but still in all these countries is, at least as of now, a lot of money. Hopefully, people will be willing to sponsor new studies.
So we have to get more grant money, but we've kept the CogeX group intact.
That's good.
And we've got a little bit of seed funding over the next year to get together as a group and decide how we're going to plan our next grant. And so it's all exciting. We're still analyzing a lot of the data as well. This is such a rich data set. There's still going to be a lot of new insights coming out from the data that we've already collected. We put out our main finding. We still have to explore a lot of the imaging data. We can even go back and look at individual differences. And so we're not done yet with analyzing our data.
Okay, so there will be probably a few more papers on CogeX coming out. Fantastic. So how and where can interested people follow your research activities or the activities of CogeX and everything that will come in the future?
I think through the MS Canada website. They've certainly highlighted this study. It was a very big investment for them, and they've put up a little video clip of me talking about this. And the website tells people of new studies that are being funded. It keeps people abreast of what the research environment is like in Canada. So that's a useful place to start.
Okay, fantastic. And I will put this, of course, in the show notes and in the blog articles that will go with this podcast. And Anthony, thank you very much. Such an interesting study. And of course, good luck with everything that is coming. And thank you for diving deep with me and the listeners into that topic. And to you out there, please be active in whatever possibility you have. And I think one really important thing is do take care of your symptomatic issues so you can be active. I think one bad thing is always if, I don't know, somebody has problems with incontinence or things like that, and then staying at home because he or she doesn't feel good. You should never do that. You should use the medical aids. You should use the possibilities that are out there, the symptomatic treatment options, and stay as active and try to have a fulfilling life as best as possible. And then life can be good even with progressive MS.
I think that's the advice. Excellent. So thank you for your interest in the topic.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed the interview, learned something new, and got inspired to do more with your free time or your time at work, and are as excited as I am to what the future has to offer on this field of research, because it's so important to take care of people with progressive MS. By the way, next time I will talk to Professor Dr. Tjalf Ziemsen about future treatment of MS, and I think one part will be the focus on the digital twin. So a twin of each individual MS patient based on lots of data, where it would allow better prognosis, but also then treatment when we have a kind of a matching partner and can see the path of the living with MS. So this will be very, very interesting again, and I hope you tune in again. And of course, please tell everybody who might be interested in the podcast about it. Please let me know if you have further recommendations or wishes on certain topics, and stay as healthy and active as you can. And see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You may also be interested in the previously published episodes and posts, which you can find at ms-perspektive.com/podcast. Perspective with a K. You can also get a free PDF with 11 tips for your positive impact on MS at ms-perspektive.com/newsletter. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach me at nele@ms-perspektive.com or on social media. See you next time.